In 2020, picked up that Morgan Housel book, Psychology of Money. And chapter 7, right at the beginning, it said, the real true freedom is the freedom to wake up every day and decide what you want to do. And I thought, oh my God, that is what I want. And then from that point on, like those next 3 years, I really got to work kind of figuring out how I wanted to structure my life in order to have that freedom of time.
Do you think money takes up more life space than it should? On this show, we discuss with and share stories from artists, authors, entrepreneurs, and advisors about how they mindfully minimize the time and energy spent thinking about money. Join your host, Jonathan Dio, and learn how to put money in its place and get more out of life.
Hey, welcome back on this episode of the Mindful Money Podcast. I'm chatting with Brian Herriot. Brian's a financial coach and the founder of Choosy Consultant. He helps mid-career professionals escape the corporate grind. His framework for personal growth and financial success all start with taking back control of our only truly limited resource, time. Brian's a lifelong management consultant. He's worked for Accenture, Point B. He started his own firm about 7 years ago. Most importantly for today's conversation, he spends, we'll get into this, he spends months at a time away from work. So with time to reflect and wander, he believes he's unlocked the secret to living a rich and meaningful life. And that's a secret I want to learn. So I wanted to have him up on the podcast for 2 reasons. One, I am that mid-career professional who loves the idea of more time. And 2, because he believes everyone should define what success means to them with character over resume. And I want to talk about that as well. So Brian, welcome to the Mindful Money Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited for the conversation. First, where do you call home and where are you connecting from?
I call home the Bay Area in California. I live on the island of Alameda, which is just off of Oakland. And my family of one wife, one son, live here for 9 months out of the year. And then we spend our summer months in the north woods of Wisconsin on a lakeside cabin that we were fortunate enough to buy many years ago up there.
Do you have Wi-Fi or is it silent?
Well, we do have Wi-Fi, and it is, for the most part, reliable, except for when we tried to record this podcast about 2 months ago when I was there. And that does happen every now and then. But yes, it's good enough.
Yeah. So did you grow up in the Bay Area or Wisconsin, I guess?
I grew up in Wisconsin. So our connection to the Northwoods of Wisconsin is that my grandparents had a cabin up there, and I've been going up there ever since I can remember. Unfortunately, they sold their cabin when I was in college because nobody was coming up anymore. And I was obviously not in a position to purchase a cabin then. But just then I met my girlfriend, who is now my wife, who also lived up there. So I moved a couple lakes over and never stopped visiting up there. Soon we bought our second home before our first, because, to buy a home in California is a little expensive. So we started with a kind of a squirrel-infested cabin and kind of worked things backwards. We've done things a little bit backwards in our lives that way.
That actually leads a good question. Is there, not that there's a reason for it, but what did you learn growing up in Wisconsin about money and entrepreneurship?
That's a good question. I have not been asked that before. I would say what I learned was obviously directly from my parents, who were, traditional Midwest hardworking people. My mom was a nurse turned realtor. My dad worked for an appliance manufacturer as a marketing manager. And the lessons that we learned were work hard, save your money, kind of the traditional kind of money management mindset. I did not grow up in a family of entrepreneurs, although that is what I do now. I actually even have thought about this recently, where I did mow lawns growing up, and my dad said, "Oh, well, if you ever wanted to make that into a business, I'd help you figure that out." But for some reason I said, "No, I'm just going to play baseball," or something like that. So I had an opportunity to do it, but I never did, interestingly enough. So traditional save your money, invest it, 401k kind of thing.
Interesting. You mowed lawns, but never turned it into a business. I mean, isn't it a business if you mowed lawns?
I guess I used our family lawnmower and took it around to 3 neighbors, and I collected the money. I don't even think I paid for the gas. Maybe it was a good business because I didn't have any expenses.
Low overhead. Low
It
overhead.
was just my time. But my dad, he asked me, no, we could go in and I'd buy you a trailer and, we could make it bigger. And I think that's great that because he was not that back then. He had a corporate job. Although, interestingly enough, he had the entrepreneurial bug too, and later in life actually started a concrete painting and concrete countertop business later in life, which is pretty cool. So maybe he was trying to, get ahead on that and offering that suggestion to me as a kid.
I love it. I love just a little bit of entrepreneurship, a little bit of advice growing up. It's important. So I want to go back to, you said something, your mom was a nurse and became a real estate agent. How old were you when that happened? And was that financially driven, or was it like tired of dealing with, sick people?
Good question. Yeah, that happened when I think I was about 8 or 9 or maybe 10 years old at the time. And it was not financially driven. I think it was actually kind of in line with what we, want to talk about here at some point today. But time, she did not like having to work every other Christmas and have to work, which I've learned it happens when, you have to be at the hospital needs to run on all days. And that got to be too much for her. And so not as though she didn't want to work, because as a realtor, she was also working at odd hours of the day, but at least she could control if she had to work on Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever the holiday happened to be.
Do you think that experience informs sort of the conversation around the importance of time today? Is that like the earliest inkling?
I would say yes, certainly, because when I would go up north, we call it up north, to visit my grandparents' cabin, it was my dream back when I was a kid. I wanted to be a teacher because they had summers off. And my whole life has been organized around this way of getting summers off. I've realized all the way back to then. And I actually was a teacher for a couple of years. I did Teach for America earlier in my career. It's so hard. The work is so hard and the pay is so poor. I have all the respect in the world for teachers, but I couldn't do it. And so I had to kind of figure out a different way to eventually get the summers off situation that I desired for so many years.
Yeah. It sounds like you did it. Can you give us like a thumbnail sketch of your career arc? Like, what did you do to get here? What inspired you to start the Choosy Consultant?
Yeah, I was a engineer, industrial engineer out of school, and then was, lifelong management consultant. So I did consulting for a long time, flew on planes, worked long hours, did that whole thing. I took my first non-consulting job at UCSF Health back in 2012. And in that first year, you have these life inflection points. It happened to be on one of my bus rides into the city that day, I saw the news that Marissa Mayer had been named the CEO of Yahoo, and she was 35, the same age I was. And when I looked her up, she was from a rural city in Wisconsin, just like me. And that one, many people were way more successful than me, but for some reason, because she was so much similar to me, that one really hit me hard. Like, what am I doing here? I hadn't really thought about what I wanted. I guess it came down to it. And so I decided I'm going to go for it. And I worked really hard the next couple of years to try to move, all the way up. But actually what happened was right around when I turned 40, I was demoted back down from a director down to a manager. So it was exactly the opposite of what I wanted while I was watching all this stuff happen with Marissa Mayer. So I kind of, still worked, still did what I needed to do. And then in 2020, picked up that Morgan Housel book, Psychology of Money. And chapter 7, right at the beginning, it said, the real true freedom is the freedom to wake up every day and decide what you want to do. And I thought, oh my God, that is what I want. It is not that I want to be a CEO of UCSF Health or whatever, or Yahoo. And that kind of so I had that up, down, up. And then from that point on, those next 3 years, I really got to work kind of figuring out how I wanted to structure my life and work in order to have that freedom of time. I call it lifestyle freedom, to do what you want. And that that ultimately led me to the first summer that I took off was 2023. So this is still relatively new to me, but it was the first. I'd been working in Wisconsin over the summers since COVID hit because we had that flexibility. But then, yeah, 2023 was the first summer. We did a month in Portugal, 2 months at our cabin, and then this summer as well, I didn't work either. So, and I like it, but I also like coming back to work.
I have a really close friend of mine who I've also had on the podcast, Gary Ray, who runs a small retail store, but he's put processes in place. So I make way more money than he does, but he has way more time, like 6 months away. He can check email and do a few ordering things when he's, in the camper in South America, and he's taken 6 months trips through South America with his son. And I've never been able to do that kind of stuff. So there's something about this time freedom, or the ability to set up your life, live it, not work. You got to work. Everyone's got to earn some money, but there's something about how did you stumble upon this as the thing, as the goal?
I just really like spending time at the lake. I mean, that's the simplistic answer. I also I don't know, like I went through all the stages that a lot of people go through, I think, where you kind of hit midlife and you go, okay, I've saved a lot. Let's go run the numbers. And then you see that even though you've saved a lot, you still have a long way to go if you really want true financial freedom. So in my mind, financial freedom is that you do not have to work.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted initially, right? I don't want to work. But it was still going to take me 5, 7, 9, 10 or more years, enabled to do that. But I just didn't want to wait. And I don't actually remember. I'm sure it must have been a podcast or something where I first kind of heard the idea where it was, why don't you actually just leverage what savings you already have to kind of give yourself a buffer. And then that means you actually don't have to work 100% of the year. And you can kind of figure out if you want to work part-time or if you want to work part of the year, or figure it out how it works in your life, and kind of put those two pieces together. So you have, some financial freedom and some professional freedom, and kind of together it makes up the true lifestyle freedom.
Yeah. I guess there's a certain group of people that this works for. And I want to talk about thinking about this as just a huge privilege. Like I think I could arrange my life in this way. I have a college degree. I went to grad school. I've been in industry for 25, 30 years. Like, I'm deeply white collar, like, right? But there's a whole, 60% of the population that don't have that access or don't have that ability. Are you just speaking to those people that have, run their own shows, maybe executives, maybe, and could, or are you trying to inspire masses to do more of this kind of time thinking?
I'm trying to move towards the masses. So the people that I work with are like you described, right? They have developed a set of skills, have a network, could turn that into consulting or coaching, right? That is my niche. But I think it can work broader. And like I heard a story of somebody who, they were a ski instructor, so that they, had to work through in the winter, but they didn't want to work in the summer. Or they had a lawn care business, but, didn't need to work in the winter. So, if you don't spend that much, you don't have to make that much either. So I don't necessarily think it's just reserved for the people who could make a ton of money.
Yeah.
I do think, though, like you said, that people don't have a chance to think about what it could be like if they're kind of working day to day, getting money on the table. So I don't think it's reserved for white collar, or I do think service industry is probably easier because you can kind of, change how you run your business to do intensives and things like that. Although, yeah, this is not a very good answer to your question, but I want it to be available to more people.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm actually trying to meet more people like that. I'm working on a book with the goal of, sharing the same stuff that I have. But, if you can't work with me one-on-one, how could you read about it and try to apply it in your life, more broadly? And in order to do that, I need to make sure that I'm sharing it in a way that is more applicable to different types of professional.
I assume you read broadly in like success literature, you listen to podcasts, and so as do I. There's something that I see that's very universal across blogs and podcasts in the entire professional world. That's the path to success begins with sort of a real deep understanding of what's important to you. And I think what you talk about is some people that are working really hard to put food on the table never have a chance to reflect and just to sit back and say, what do I want? I think that anyone can move in the direction, but they gotta start with that reflection. So it's really important, I think, to lead with that for people. So I like the fact that you're moving in that direction.
Maybe it's because we have one child, and like, I also think about our friends who had, like 3 kids and they were all between the ages of 1 and 4. Like we call them the dark years. You can't do anything except for just deal with the situation that you're in. So yeah, it comes with the luxury, and the benefit is the ability to have a little time that you can have that reflection on and trying to understand what's important to you, for sure.
So important. How do you work in this idea of building character over resumes?
So this was I'm going to forget the name of the author. He's a newspaper columnist.
David Brooks.
David Brooks. The David Brooks book on character versus resume traits. I loved it.
Yep, me too.
And my first exposure to this was really as a consultant when I was with Point B. So Point B at the time had an incredible culture of service leadership from the back seat of the car kind of situation, doing a great job but not taking any credit for it, letting the client take all the accolades for the work. And I don't know if it was my Midwestern upbringing or what, but that just really resonated with me. I just love that. And also that was in my, my early 30s, real like formative time for me professionally. And that really stuck with me. And then, I had a brief moment of going, wait a second, I need to climb myself up to the C-level of a business until it dawned on me like, whoa, wait, I was never like that in the first place. And that's probably why I couldn't do it, because I wasn't, it wasn't a fit for me. But I think that's originally how that came to be for me.
So you've referenced David Brooks. I've read all 3 of his, like his character and then How to Get to Know Somebody. They're fantastic books. Love them.
They're good.
And Morgan Housel, in terms of financial writers, I think he's like number 1. Like he is my favorite person to read. I read him like almost weekly. I see his stuff. Yeah. And he's great.
It's very accessible. It's short, it's quick. And also he presents things that you kind of know, but you didn't really realize, oh yeah, that is right. That is true.
And he brings in some history. Like he brings in some 1938, this, that, you're like, oh,
he's well read.
Cool. Yeah. Very well read. So I'm just over 50. And I know that you talk a little bit about the smile curve, right? So I feel like I'm coming off kind of a difficult period. Like my kids are my one just went to college. The other one's going to be out of the house in a year and a half. And I think you call this the what, why smile curve. Can you explain that for us? This period of life?
Yeah, well, the research that I saw was from 2008, and it was the study of 500,000, I think it was Europeans and Americans, and kind of looking at just general happiness, motivation over the years of your life. And they mapped it out, and it showed that, in your 20s, coming out of college, people are happy, they're motivated, they're excited. But then as you hit later in 30s and in your 40s, it kind of starts to dip down. But fortunately, all hope is not lost, because as you hit like 50s, 60s, 70s, and then all of a sudden you kind of get back up to the heights at the end. So that's the version of this, it looks like a smile. And what I believe is happening there is it's kind of the midlife crisis thing in a way. And this happened for me. I'd be curious to see if this is, how you experience kind of your work in your life. Is like you hit those years in your 20s and your 30s and you're just working hard. And it's like, what am I working on next? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then something happens in your 40s, or maybe in me, it was, late 30s. And you almost ask that question, like, why was I doing all this again? It was that Marissa Meyer moment was mine. And then you kind of make a choice. And so you're switching over from like, what am I doing to why am I doing it? Mm-hmm. And I think that happens naturally. And that's eventually people figure it out and they move into the wisdom and teaching and those sorts of things and start to move back up. But my thinking is, if you're aware that this is going to happen, couldn't you somehow make that smile not have to be so deep, like kind of catch it a little earlier and make that transition. But like you said, it's that point where you have to either have the time, which is usually not the case, or be forced into having the time. Loss, job loss, divorce, somebody dies, some event happens that forces you into thinking, what do I want here?
Hey.
That's when you can make that change.
Is that in that literature? Is it in the research that if the event happens, and I ask because I'll just tell you the story. I'm a workaholic. I own it. Like I actually really like what I do. So I do a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Well, my brother died in 2021. And then like questions, like, what am I doing this for? My buddy Gary travels 6 months out of the year. What's the point of all this work? Why, the whys came up.
Yeah.
So is that in the research that is a stimulant for
No,
the question?
It's not. That research is just modeling the happiness curve, basically.
You're thinking this might happen.
This is and I mean, I'm sure there's I haven't gone to look, but I'm sure there's other studies that talk about, life inflection points and things like that. But yeah, I mean, even like City Slickers, remember that movie?
Yeah, I do.
When he's like, it's the one thing, it's like, and I actually, it was on TBS or something the other day, and I just saw the part where he tells him about that, and he goes, it was Jack Palance, right? He's the rough guy. He's like, this always happens. How old are you? 39? And he's like, yeah, I'm 39. It's almost like to a T when it happens in life. And I don't know, like, does that mean that everyone's going to have a death in the family or something then? I don't know. It's around there.
Yeah.
But boy, those things that I think you're just at a different stage. So when that thing does happen, you're like primed for it.
Yeah.
You're primed to want to ask yourself those questions. But again, this is just I'm no researcher or psychologist or anything like that. I'm just trying to project what I think.
Thinking about the people you work with, though. I mean, is it also? It's not. People may say, "Hey, I want to have more time freedom," but does that also come with career shift, divorce? Your kids go off to college. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in that mid late 40s, early 50s.
Yes, I think the worst scenario is where something like that happens. You're 50, something happens. And you look at your numbers and you're like, well, I'm kind of close, just 15 more years, just 10 more years. And then all of a sudden you find yourself kind of convincing yourself to just settle for 15 years and just keep at it. Like, fortunately, like in your case or my case, I do really we love what we're doing, right? But I don't think everybody does.
Right.
Or there's good elements, but there's a lot of, the corporate politics and the administrative type stuff that you have to do and all those sorts of things. And you're like, I'm just going to suck it up and deal with it for another 15 years. And that makes me actually really sad. That's the thing that I really don't want anyone to do. Because like, what happens if you do have an accident or something happens in like year 14 and you've just settled for those years? I mean, that's just awful. But I can understand why people might feel that way. Anyway, my goal is to get people to be like, just imagine you don't have to do that. What would you want to do? Let's run the numbers and see how that could actually work. And not just the numbers, but then figure out how you could restructure your work in a way that you could actually find this time freedom. So
you're actually looking at both. You're looking at financial feasibility and at process strategy. Yeah.
And that's kind of the unique. I mean, it's also been like a struggle in how I talk about what I do, because there's a very much a financial component to it. At the root of it, I am a financial coach because I'm talking about the numbers. But the numbers, for the people I work with, for them to have time freedom, 80% of the time you need to be self-employed, right? That's how you're going to be able to control it. There's ways that jobs you can get and things like that have more time freedom, but by and large, it's self-employment. So then all of a sudden you have, you kind of have to be an entrepreneurial small business advisor in a way too. And it's not just finances, it's also, entrepreneurship as well. That is kind of the combination. But for me, like, and when I work with people, it starts with the finances, because when you, like, I talk about this concept of the lifestyle freedom equation. So it's super simple. On one side, you've got what you live on. Right now, I'm not one for suggesting that you cut way back and scrimp and save, but actually that you spend with your values. Once you take a look at that number, if you could start to use some of the savings that you have, let's say you live in California and it costs $200,000 to live, and everywhere else, maybe, change the numbers, but then you could draw 100,000 on your savings. All of a sudden you only have to make $100,000 a year, which again, this is not everybody, but for people that, are working in corporate jobs and you're like, $100,000, maybe I could do that in 6 months, or maybe I could do that in 4 months if I'm trading my time. Or you have a business that you can set up with processes and have people working with you that allow you to step away for 6 months. That's another scenario as well. But there's ways to do it, but people tend to kind of think in how they've always done it or how their parents did it. And you're not really kind of exploring these crazy ideas. And sometimes, you come up with an idea like, I'm going to sell my house in California and move full-time to Wisconsin, financially free forever.
Yeah.
Sure, it would work, but I don't want to do that, but at least it kind of forces you to think, well, what other kind of crazy idea could I do? And so a lot of, I think what I battle is a little bit of fear around the money stuff, but mostly it's just conventional thinking. Like, this way of living is not common. And also in a typical 40-hour-a-week job, it's not possible. And so it's hard to break out of that. And it's nobody's fault. It is kind of what it is.
Yeah. Just a quick story. I had a good friend of mine who his job was just killing him. He was like a construction advisor, working for a big company, building industrial things, and just killing him. Body was worn out, just couldn't do it anymore. And he's like, you know what? I don't need that much more. I need to work for a few more years so I don't touch my savings and let that grow, right? And so he ended up growing raspberries in his backyard and selling them to local restaurants because he loved his garden. He loved growing raspberries. So he's like, I'm going to put all kinds of rows of raspberries in. He had pints and pints and pints and pints of raspberries, really, really good raspberries, right? And it made, that made enough for him to make his payment and stuff on it. So just, how do I tread water for 4 or 5 years? And if I have to, I'll work in a hardware store. He loved hardware, so just how do I pursue the passion, do something I'll do anyways, not have to do the grind, protect the body, and then 5 years, then I can draw on my portfolio if I need to, right? That kind of thing. I love the idea of just being creative, figuring something out that can make it work. Is that kind of the idea in terms of property?
It's exactly the idea. Yeah. So like my scenario, I was actually had you pulling a little bit of your savings, and in yours, you weren't. It's just that this person made as much as he needed to live off of. And I think you're kind of coasting to your retirement, basically.
Coast fire.
You got it.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yep.
And so it's a perfect, it's another variation. And then how many people are jealous because, he's doing exactly what he wants. You probably look half the age because the stress isn't hitting you anymore. Like, those are the best when somebody retires and they come back for a retirement party when they've been retired for 2 years, and they come back on the Zoom and you look at them and you're like, oh my God, you look so young. Like, I don't want to ever have that experience. I always want to look as young as I can look,
So, define corporate grind. I know you talk about helping people escape the corporate grind. So I don't know is there still a corporate grind? And I know that there is. That's a stupid question, but what is the corporate grind?
My take is, like, the people that I work with are successful people, and successful people always find the work, because I still consult for my client is a large company. So I see this day in and day out. And so even though I myself am just self-employed, I still work when I do work with a big company. And so you see all types, but the people that are good are the ones that attract the work. And then that therefore means they're doing the job of 2 people instead of 1. Plus, with all of this tightening going on recently, I think the people that are let go in the tech space or market media space or wherever they happen to be, they have it tough, but it's also tough on all the people that are left behind who have to then absorb all that work. So all of a sudden, you're doing the job of more than one person and dealing with all the politics. I think the combination of those 2 things, and a lot of times the stuff that the work that you have to do, that's the second person's work, is all this just additional work that isn't even necessary. It's like administrative type stuff that needs to get done. It's part of the process, so you have to do it. And all of a sudden you realize that's how you start working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And that's tough. And I think that's why people get so stressed and burned out.
So I want to ask the how question in a second, but I managed a business for about 20 years. And I think in the early days, I had this idea, and I remember starting it because I want to be able to leave at 3. Like because I don't have kids yet. I want to be able to go get my kids from school. That was my thinking. 15 years in, when I can finally do that, I'm working more than my clients that are in the corporate grind. So how do you keep your entrepreneurial lift in check? Because you can always, my mom used to say, if you want something done, give it to somebody who's busy because they'll get it done.
Yeah. No, that's exactly
Keep that in check.
In a new business, so outside of the corporate stuff, I think 2 things I could probably say. One is I feel like if you have a multi-person small business, 3, 4, 5, 6, the more people that you have, the more responsibility you have, right? And so you're going to feel obligated. And so the scenarios that I work on with people are solo endeavors, single person things, or some, it's them plus an administrative assistant, things like that. Because I've noticed, so my consulting firm has gone from me to me plus 2, and but I'm so careful about who I hire because I don't want, I'd rather have less money and less stress than more money and more stress. And so the only people I hire are just absolutely incredible people that make my job easier, not harder. But if you're in a situation with a decent sized small business, that's going to happen to you. I just don't know what else to say. But otherwise, the other thing that I just semi-recently read was that Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy book that 10x is easier than 2x, which again, there's examples in there and I haven't seen it applied yet, but the concept really is attractive to me, where it's which is if you want to grow 10%, you just do all the stuff you're doing 10% better. But if you want to grow 10 times, there's really 1 or 2 things that you can do. So figure out what those things are and just work on those. So how do you get massively bigger and you work less? It seems like it would work. I'm actually trying to figure out how to try that out in my own business. Through writing a book and speaking. And that's a shift that I'm consciously making and going, those are the 2 big things I'm going to work on, and then see what happens based on that, instead of doing all the stuff I'm already doing 10% better. So we'll see.
The idea of limiting it to, and that's, you nailed the issue I had. I had 7, 8 people. And once you have 7 or 8 people and you have HR, you've got tech stack, and you got all the stuff you got to manage, at the end of the day, there is no 40-hour work week anymore.
What's similar to that too, that I've found with people that I work with, is they have 3 to 4 rental properties. So again, if you had 1 rental property, that would work. Or if you had 15, that would work because you could hire someone. But when you're in that middle, you're stuck doing everything for all of them. And it almost sounds like if your business was a little bigger, then you could have that right-hand person that would take over, or less, which is the easier solution from my perspective. That would also work, but you're stuck in that middle, and that's where it's extra tough.
Yeah,
that's extra tough.
The whole idea of scale. I told the story a bunch of times. My brother died in June of 21, and he was going to join my firm and be the CEO in January of 22. We had planned this for a decade. He had to get out of tech. He had his last shares. He had to vest. He had all this kind of stuff. And it was a total accident, fluke thing that took him. And I almost had that person that would give me that space. And that's why by the end of the year, I had merged the firm, because I just couldn't go back to know myself. But that's such a good point.
Wow.
That I really appreciate.
How old was he?
He was 46. 46.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. You got to beware of, what's it called? Riptide. He drowned in near Santa Cruz. Beware of riptides. And he knows better, but it's
pulled in. Wow.
Pretty rough. And it was very cold, Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Pulling it together. So I want you to, I ask this of everybody. I want you to simplify it for us. So say you're chatting with someone, that they're currently doing the management consulting thing, maybe at Deloitte or they're a Fortune 500 company, whatever. What is the one thing they can do today that's going to lead them to more time freedom?
I think I'm not super happy with my answer here, but let's go. The thing that you identified about taking a moment to figure out what's really important to you is is what they have to do, because I've found for me to say, you need time freedom, you should go do it, unless that's internalized, is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I always reflect this in the way of, like, when you're putting your action plan together, what's the first thing you should do? Wait until the time is right, which is like a weird set of tools for someone to do to go take action on something. But like, when the time is right, you're going to get really good really fast. My son never wanted to take drum lessons, although he's an incredible drummer. But I learned not to force him to do it, because when he's in college and he figures out he wants to do it, in 1 year, he'll have made more progress than he could have in 15 years, So I think you need to internalize the fact that you want it. And to do that, you need to actually have a moment to think about it. So you need a little time to figure out if you want more time. How about that?
No, I like it. I like it. It goes back to that phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right?
Oh yeah. I like that.
So that's one thing that someone has to do. What is one thing that's keeping them trapped, something they should stop doing?
You need to just stop listening to conventional wisdom sometimes. Boy, is that hard to do, though. It's so easy to just say, stop doing that. That's why I'm kind of struggling with it. But it's like, there are no shortage of people telling you how you should do stuff. Usually it involves making a lot more money and, rising up the ranks, becoming all powerful at your work. And to decide to do that differently is very hard. Not just to decide to do it yourself, but to do it while all these messages are hitting you. So, yeah, stop taking in all the messages. Easier said than done.
but so important. Today, imagine someone starting a business and getting the message from their parents 35 years ago, hey, don't do this. That's insane. You should be a doctor, or you should be a lawyer, right? Today, you get the message from your parents, and everyone on Facebook and everyone on every social media and everyone that's complaining in just general media about the malaise and how bad everything is. And you're like, what am I doing? It's so easy just to get crushed by all that. So yeah, I think that's probably something you got to stop doing. I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
You said you were writing a book. Okay, what's the topic? You might have already touched on it.
Yeah. The book is for someone who really values financial freedom, but believes that they need to kind of become independently wealthy to get it. I am suggesting that there's a different way you can do it, by kind of taking a look at the modest savings that you have accumulated and combining that with a flexible, free work of choice. And if you can combine those two things together, you actually don't need financial freedom. You just want the freedom part. You need money, but maybe not as much as you think. And so that's who I'm writing for, and to try to teach a slightly different path. And then, using framework and stories, including a couple that I'm going to ask you about later, about people that have done this, because I don't think everybody has a lot of good examples out in life of individuals that have done this and are really happy about it. Because whenever I tell it, people are like, wow, that's so cool, but it wouldn't work for me. And I'm like, no, wait a second. Don't just automatically think that. I want more people to be able to experience more time earlier in life so that they can do the things that they want to do.
I think you're on something, and it's something I've thought a little bit about too. So there's this whole group of people that do what I do for helping people retire, right? That's get a big pile of assets and live off the income from those assets. And then there's people that are in the FIRE community. They're like, okay, retire as quickly as you can. So minimize your expenses and start way over here. You're saying, hey, why don't you do something you like?
You got it.
Do something you like in the middle, make some money and live on some assets, but make some. You can do that for until you're 80. I know attorneys and I know real estate agents. My real estate agent, when I bought my first home in Berkeley, worked until she was like 78 years old. She only did a couple deals a year, but
that's all you need to.
She needed, right?
Yeah.
So there's something, I think you're onto something. There's a middle point where you do what you like.
And where it first kind of dawned on me also was, I was listening to, again, some podcast, I can't remember what it was, but they were talking, it was financial advisors who had worked with thousands of people. And they said, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this too, but they said, people that can't afford to retire so want to retire, But the people that can totally afford to do it don't necessarily want to or need to, because they've somehow figured out a life or a work for themselves that allows them to keep going. And I'm like, wow, if that's actually true, then how unfortunate would it be to work this hard job all the way up to the end and then go, oh, I guess I don't want to retire. Like, why not kind of pull back what you really want to do and do that, sooner and not wait for so long?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that resonate with who you work with?
That resonates personally. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, exactly. And a lot of people I work with, but there's the message. Oh, it's not going to be enough. There's the little, things you'd be worried about this. You got to keep going, and
that's if you stop working completely, I believe. I think the most freedom you could ever have is the ability to just make money. So if you could turn on and turn up and turn down how much you're making, that is more freedom than having $5 million in the bank, because who knows what could happen to that money.
Right.
It's out of your control. Having a lot of money is one level of freedom, but being able to make it on a moment's notice, because, the skills and the network and the this and that, like, if you could do that, boy, in my mind, that should take away the
fear.
The fear.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So just before we wrap up, I like to ask a couple more personal questions. And this first one always catches people off guard. So take a second.
Okay.
What was the last thing you changed your mind about?
Oh, well, I don't know if it's the last, but I know one that's pretty big, and it's money related. And boy, people are so entrenched in their beliefs about money, but I'll tell it to you anyway. I was a Vanguard buy and hold passive low cost index fund, personal finance for dummies, the whole, bit, from the time I was swindled by an insurance salesman when I was 20. Okay. And 4 years ago, I heard somebody say that market risk was manageable. And I'm like, that's bogus. But I actually believe that now through this version of momentum investing that I have half of my money managed with on the side of the buy and hold part, which, controls your downside loss because of the loss asymmetry, where you have to get twice the return to get back to even. And I thought, I never really thought about when you sell, all those sorts of things. And so I went down this deep path of learning. And I actually now believe that there is a different way that's also successful, that's also in line with all of my values around low cost and diversification and all those very, very important things that everyone should learn and follow. That's different from just traditional buy and hold investing. And I've never thought I would have said that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I love, and I would point to this, I love how you are doing half and half. Like,
oh yeah,
not all in, but yeah, there's no idea. Let's use. I love that. That's exactly the way to think about it, I think.
Well, that's one of my principles. It should be, whatever method you use should be very testable, so that you can adjust, if you need to. But yeah, and that is not conventional at all.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That might be a bonus chapter in the book, because it's so different. It's
I have a totally different take, and we'll probably have to talk about this offline, but I don't believe in market risk. I don't think there is any. So,
oh, okay. Well, you've gone even further than me. So that's good.
We'll talk about that at a different time. So if one last question, if you could get the truth about any question about your life or your future, I can't give you the answer, but if you could get the truth, what question would you ask?
Actually, it would be kind of a two-parter. Will my wife and son be okay? And if not, tell me exactly what to do to make sure that they are. How about that? Yeah.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
I just want to sit with that for a second. That's, will my wife and child be okay? I'm going to tear up. That was awesome.
No, I do think about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we can talk more about that offline.
So tell people how they can connect with you. Where do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at choosyconsultant.com. And from there, there's other ways that you can connect with me, take a quiz and do all of that fun stuff. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you have anything you want to talk about or anything interesting to say. That'd be awesome.
All right, Brian, thanks for coming on. We're going to make sure all that's in the show notes. And I just really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at mindful.money. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/mindfulmoney. We'll be sure to read those out on future episodes.